I remember the day I was on my way home from school, but I didn't go directly home. Instead, I took the long way to keep walking and listening to music. But I wish I never had because that was when I found a head. I was walking the trail I sometimes took when I wanted a bit of extra time before I arrived home. More me time, you could say. So I carried along the track until something caught the corner of my eye. Something white. I stopped to look down the bank and saw a white sack lying deep in the grass beneath the tall bushes that surrounded the edge. Curious to know what it was, I put down my Walkman and crawled carefully down the bank. I was getting caught on every other branch on my way down. I was starting to think this may not be worth what I might find. But I was wrong. I finally made it down and crept closer to the bag, which seemed to glow. I mean, it was daylight. I could see as clearly as anything, but the bag had a presence I had never felt before. As I got closer, my heart pounded faster and faster, as if something was warning me not to touch it. Then I was right in front of it. I was right there. I carefully picked the bag up and undid the rope that had tied the bag shut. But before I could open it, I heard something behind me. I tied the bag back up and crawled up the hill. With the bag slung over my shoulder, I headed home quickly. What could it be? It could be a bag of money. It'll surely be rich. It could be gold or silver. Whatever it was, it had some heft to it. I ran up the stairs to my house, opened the door, ran straight to my room, and threw the bag on the bed. Mother yelled, "Dinner's ready," and I cried, "Coming?" I looked at the bag a bit more, inching further toward it. I picked up the bag, trying to feel how heavy it was. It seemed like it had seen a better day or two. It smelled, and it had mold growing on the sides. I pulled the rope to undo the bag and looked inside. My whole body froze and started to shake, sweat dripping from my face and covering my eyes. Blinded by sweat, I looked stunned at what I saw. It was a human head. I pulled the bag down as I looked and gazed at it. I cannot tell you why it was there, but I know this. It was human, but also, at the same time, not. The eyes were shrunken inside themselves, glazed purple and blue. The skin was a tint of green. The hair was pure silver, and the lips were ruby red. I just stared at it for what felt like an eternity. Then I snapped out of my daze. My mother was crying out for me again. I put it back in the bag, tied it back up, threw it in my closet, and ran out the door. As I ate dinner that night, I sat in silence. People would try and make conversation, and I would stare at them as if I did not know what they were saying. I quickly finished and returned to my room to continue inspecting this thing. As I ran back, my mother looked at me and asked, "What's wrong with you tonight? Anything you need to tell me?" I told her, "No, I'm just tired," and off I went. As I opened my door, I felt a shiver run down my spine, something that still, to this day, I have never felt. I shut the door and went straight to my closet. As I pulled it open, it was nowhere to be seen. I looked high and low, the top and bottom shelves, even under my bed. I could not find it anywhere. Finally, I yelled at my mother and asked, "Did you touch the bag inside the closet?" She came in and sternly told me she had not been in my room and asked, "What's with you tonight?" I assured her nothing was wrong, and I got into bed. As I lay there watching TV, I couldn't help but feel terrified of what had just happened. How could this be? It was there 30 minutes ago. I saw, found, touched, and now it's gone. I stared at the empty closet all night. Needless to say, I only got 2 hours of sleep. The next day after I got out of bed, I looked again, and still nothing. Maybe it was all an illusion, just a weird fever dream. I got ready for school and did my usual routine, shower, get dressed, have breakfast, then head out the door to walk to school. Listening to the teachers blather on about history was an ordinary Wednesday. The bell rang at the end of the day, and off I went. I was walking home with my friends, and one by one they said goodbye and walked into their homes. Then I walked further down and saw the long path to home. I thought, "No, I won't be going down there again." I continued until I looked back. Something told me to take that path back home again, as it was my usual way home. So I turned around and headed back and down the same track. I put in my earphones and kept walking. I was near where I saw the bag last time. Then, in the corner of my eye, I saw the bag in the exact spot I had seen it before. I moved closer to get a better view, and it was. It was the same bag, mold, and all still caked on it, still stuck underneath the thick bush that surrounded it. I ran back home, and I never walked down that path again. This is story number 2. Secret Admirer. It started with a ding on my phone, a notification from my OnlyFans, announcing a new subscriber. That wasn't unusual. Most of my fans are sweet, sending tips with cheeky requests or shy compliments. This one just sent an old, worn-out teddy bear with no note. I'd have brushed it off if not for the bear's unsettling, stitched-up eyes that seemed to pierce right through its scruffy fur. I tossed it in a corner of my room and moved on. Days turned into weeks, and the gifts kept arriving, each more personal than the last. A necklace I lost at a club years ago, a postcard I sent my grandma from Paris, even a photo of my childhood dog long passed away. How did this fan find these things? Then came the letters, each typed with no signature, just a chillingly familiar recounting of my past. Memories I never shared online, moments I thought were private, poured out on paper as if my own mind had betrayed me. I tried ignoring the packages, blocking the user, but nothing worked. They always found a way back, subscribing under a new name, their identity masked in the digital crowd of faceless admirers. The last straw was the video. It popped up in my message requests, a grainy clip showing a figure walking through what looked like my old high school. The camera panned up to reveal the face of the person filming, except there was no face, just a blur where features should have been. But the voice, it whispered my name, chilling me to the bone. I called the police, but what could they do? The account was untraceable, the gifts sent from different locations around the world. No fingerprints, no leads. They told me to tighten my security, maybe take a break from streaming. But this was my livelihood, so I kept going, pretending everything was fine, smiling for the camera while my nights were haunted by the fear of who or what was watching me. Every shadow seemed to whisper, every creak of my house a sign that my faceless fan was near. Tonight, I'm going live for the first time in weeks. I've triple-checked my locks, bought a new security system, even got a friend to sit off camera. But as I prep, my phone dings again. It's a message from a new subscriber, a video link, and nothing else. My finger hovers over the button. I know I shouldn't click it, but fear and curiosity are a potent mix. The video loads, a live feed of my own room viewed from a corner. I whirl around to the spot, heart slamming against my ribs, but there's nothing there. Just the empty space and the teddy bear with the stitched eyes sitting where I threw it weeks ago, except now one eye is missing, and in its place, a tiny camera lens winks at me. My screen flickers, and a new message types itself out one letter at a time. See you soon. This is story number 3. The Morgue Secret, Gael Davis, and the Demon of Greene Memorial. Greene Memorial Clinic in Wingston was founded in the 1950s, and many cases of disappearance have occurred. Many residents say that a ghost known as the corpse matron wheels people away in the middle of the night. Many argue that it's just a rumor and that those missing patients passed away. If they had, why wasn't the other staff on shift notified? Yet, somehow, the date and time of their passing were written in red ink in their files, along with the initials AE at the bottom of the paper. It was narrowed down to someone on the night shift when asked who they were. They were probably someone that the other co-workers didn't know well. When Gael Davis was assigned to investigate the old disappearances, the record keeper took him to an old, small, dusty file room where patient records were kept from the clinic's opening to the changeover. 20 years of records were stored here from the 1950s to the 1970s. As Gael stepped into the room, he flipped on the light switch and exhaled an exhausted sigh. He hadn't even started pouring through the countless files. The record keeper, an older lady named Sylvie, handed over the key and looked up at Gael, hands on her hips. "Now remember to lock up this room when you're done, and don't take anything home with you." She wagged her finger at him. "Yes, ma'am." He nodded, showing her a smile. Sylvie tutted and made her way out of the room, leaving Gael to begin his work, who let out a low whistle as the door shut, looking at the stack of boxes and a single filing cabinet filled to the brim with files. Pulling over a crate to sit on, he started going through the first of the 3 boxes stacked next to the filing cabinet. The police chief told Gael before he left that he would be looking for the initials AE for Miss Absinthe Esper. She had been a suspect in the cases back in the 1950s, but was never found guilty. Instead, Absinthe insisted another co-worker was framing her. When asked who could be trying to frame her, she made the excuse that it was probably an intern who had conveniently stopped working there when the police started to investigate. Wingston police have suspected her for years, but never had enough evidence to warrant an arrest. Now, years later, and Absinthe has long since passed away, they could no longer charge her with the disappearance of the patients. Opening the first folder in the stack, Gael flipped through the pages, checking to see if there were any end-of-life papers in the back, along with a copy of the coroner's report. Setting it aside, he didn't see the initials AE, so he continued skimming through the stack. When he got to the next box of folders, he saw Absinthe's signature start to appear, starting with a young man named Theodore Jones. He was in for an appendectomy. During the night, while he was recovering, his body went missing under the watchful eye of Miss Esper, who had proclaimed that Theodore had left his room in the middle of the night when she was doing the nightly rounds to check on the patients. What exactly did she do with the bodies? There was a knock at the door, and Gael closed the folder, looking over his shoulder. "Come in," he said. The door swung open, and clinic director Holt Greene walked in. He was a short, stout man with a curly mustache. "Any progress, Mr. Davis? The clinic will close soon, and only the emergency side will open." "Yeah, I found where Absinthe started signing the papers on the missing patients," Gael replied, standing up on wobbly knees. Holt nodded and looked around the room. "Sylvie gave you the keys, so go ahead and lock up." The director left the room, waving goodbye over his shoulder and heading down the hall. Setting the file down, Gael walked over, flipping off the light switch and glancing at the room one last time before locking it up and heading home. Walking to his car, he looked over his shoulder to the clinic's second floor. In one of the windows was a figure of a woman in a light pastel dress with an apron over the top and a cap with a nursing symbol. Her entire body is translucent. When she smiled at him, it stretched inhumanly from ear to ear, possibly stained with red lipstick. When Gael blinked, she disappeared. Rubbing his eyes, he narrowed it down to being tired. He got into the passenger side and turned on the engine, deciding to make his way home for the night. Gael saw things because he had been staring at paperwork for too long. This unsolved case must be getting to him. The following morning, Gael made his way back to Greene Memorial. He walked through the front door, sipping coffee from a drive-through shop. Digging into his pocket, he procured the keys, fumbled to get them into the lock, and let the door creak open. Gael stepped on foot inside and flipped on the light switch, looking around the room. It was cold, and a chill traveled down his spine, even with the warm, disposable cup in his hand. He also noticed condensation on the walls, slowly dripping to the floor. "Time to get to work," Gael said to no one in particular, and sat on the same crate from yesterday. He opened a new file and set it aside if it had the initials AE. As Gael began to have a pretty good stack, he stretched and took a break, sipping down the last bit of bitter-cold coffee. The sound of footsteps began to echo down the hall, and Gael figured it was either Sylvie or Holt, but when he walked over to the door and looked down the hall, he found it empty. Gael chuckled. "It's just my mind playing tricks on me." He turned and came face to face with the same woman he saw yesterday. "Good morning." She smiled, her lips still turned upwards in an unnatural way. Gael nodded. "Morning." He returned the greeting, watching her look over at the small table he had placed the files onto. "Visitors aren't supposed to be in here." Her gaze was back on him, and she tilted slightly to the side. Oh, I'm not a visitor. Gael thought carefully before choosing his following words. I was sent here by a client to check relatives' records since they're getting tests done, to make sure it's nothing genetic. She crossed her arms over her chest. Do I look like I was born yesterday? I know exactly why you're here. You do? He blinked, confused but acted surprised. Absinthe Esper pursed her upturned lips, making her look like a sweet-lip fish. She wagged her finger for him to lean in closer, and he reluctantly complied. In a hushed whisper, she told him, You know about the demon in the morgue, too. Gael cocked his head and furrowed his brows, watching her bare a toothless, pitch-black mouth and place a finger to her lips, silencing him. Absinthe nodded. You must keep him fed, or he will swallow this place whole. He leaned back, standing at his full height. And this demon told you this? Gael questioned. She nodded and looked around him, her eyes widening. Gael caught this and peered over his shoulder, seeing nothing. No one was there. Absinthe had seen something and disappeared. According to her ghost, there was a demon in the morgue. Gael didn't want to admit it, but he would have to go down into the morgue. The place he knew would have to go down eventually, but not this soon. At this point, he didn't have a choice. Opening the filing cabinet, Gael looked for an old map to determine where the old morgue would be. With the yellow parchment in hand, he exited the record room and shut it behind him, locking it with the key. Following the layout on the map, the old morgue was on the first floor, which now would be considered the basement. Gael would need to take the elevator down, but he would need a key to access that floor. The only person to ask would be Holt Greene, the clinic director. As Sylvie walked past, he stopped her, asking if she knew if the director was in today. No, he isn't in his office today. Why? What do you need? She asked, giving him a questioning stare. I need the key to access the basement from the elevator, Gael replied. Why on earth do you want to go down there? Sylvie pressed. I think there is vital information down there, he quipped. She studied Gael and shook her head. If it keeps you out of my hair, I will get it. Meet me at the elevator on the first floor. Sylvie disappeared around the corner of the hallway, and Gael went to wait for her at the elevator. He didn't have to wait long before she showed up, handing over a tiny red key. Make sure to return it when you finish. Yes, ma'am. She rolled her eyes and went on her way. Gael entered the elevator, inserted the tiny red key, turned it on, and pressed the B1 button. She watched the doors close, and the elevator creaked and rocked, beginning its descent. The doors slowly creaked open, revealing nothing but complete darkness. Taking out his phone, he turned on the light, stepped out of the elevator, and looked around. He used his free hand to cover his nose as he walked further in. A putrid, sour smell with a sickeningly sweet undertone was in the air. This was where Absinthe said the demon lived, the one she said she fed all those innocent people to. Gael's foot bumped into something, causing it to clatter and roll across the floor. When he shone his light on the direction of the item, he saw a hand reach out and snag it away. What was that just now? There was shuffling and the sound of crunching close by. When Gael found the source, he wished that he hadn't. Before him, he was a tall man, or could it be considered that? Their limbs were unnaturally long, their skin covered in gray scales, and their eyes glowed bright yellow. Gael felt frozen in place. He scolded himself for not running back to the elevator and getting out of this place. Instead, he felt a hand on his shoulder to his left. When Gael turned to look, he saw Absinthe standing next to him, her form flickering. It was nice of you to come here without a fuss. My master is hungry and will soon need a meal. Her face looked up at Gael's. She still had that awful, unnatural, upturned smile. Her lips, which were stained red, were now smeared. She dug her nails into his shoulder, causing him to flinch and drop his phone. It bounced when it hit the ground, scattering across the floor, causing the demon to turn his attention to the two behind him. The demon stood to his full height, leering down at them. Master, I've brought you another meal. Will he suffice? Absinthe offered with a show of her hand towards Gael, who began to back away. It sniffed the air, and yellow eyes locked onto its new meal and roared. He began returning to the elevator with the demon on his heels. When Gael got to the door, he frantically pressed the button. A scaled arm shot out and grabbed him, pulling him backward by the back of his head and lifting him. He kicked wildly into the air and pulled at the hand that suspended him in the air. The demon leaned close to his ear, speaking some language he thought was Latin, until he heard it repeat the words. "Only death awaits you here." To confirm that he meant the words spoken, the demon sunk his fangs into Gael, drinking his blood and chewing his flesh. Gael tries to scream, but is silenced by a piece of duct tape being slapped onto his mouth by Absinthe, who presses a finger to her lips, silencing him. "Now be a nice sacrifice to the master, and don't make a fuss." Her unnatural red upturned smile was the last thing Gael saw. This is story number 4. Friends of the Forest, the creepy tale of the lost boy. When I think back to my childhood, my memories are a mixture of the innocent and the eerie. Growing up in a small town where everyone knew each other, my friends and I spent our days exploring the woods and fields that surrounded our neighborhood. It was the summer of 15 years ago, the summer when we met Bernard. Michael, Zachary, and I were inseparable. Michael was the kind of kid who could make friends with anyone. He had a smile that could light up a room and a laugh that was contagious. Zachary was different. He was half friend, half bully, always teasing and testing us. But in his own way, he was loyal. The three of us had our own little world, a realm of adventure and secrets that only we knew. One afternoon, while we were playing hide-and-seek in the woods behind Zachary's house, we stumbled upon a boy we had never seen before. He was sitting on a fallen tree, staring at the ground. He looked about our age, maybe a year or two older, with dark, tousled hair and piercing blue eyes. "Hey, who are you?" Michael called out, always the first to extend a hand. The boy looked up, his expression unreadable. "Bernard?" he said softly. "I've never seen you around before," I said, stepping closer. "Do you go to our school?" Bernard shook his head. "Just moved here." "Cool," Michael said, grinning. "You want to play with us?" Bernard nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. We welcomed him into our group, and for the rest of the day we ran through the woods, playing games and climbing trees. Bernard was quiet, almost shy, but there was something about him that intrigued us. He moved with a strange grace, his eyes always watchful, as if he were constantly on guard. Zachary, true to form, tested Bernard's boundaries. He teased him, called him names, but Bernard never reacted the way Zachary expected. He would simply stare at Zachary, his expression calm and composed, until Zachary would eventually give up and move on. One day, Zachary brought his disposable camera, one of those old ones with the film you had to get developed. "Let's take a picture," he said, gathering us together. We huddled close, Bernard standing slightly apart, and Zachary snapped the picture. It captured a moment in time, the four of us smiling and carefree. That picture would later become a haunting reminder of the events that would unfold. As the summer wore on, Bernard's presence became a regular part of our days. He never spoke much about his family or where he lived, and whenever we asked, he would change the subject. But we didn't mind. We were just happy to have another friend. Then, one day, Bernard didn't show up. We waited at our usual spot in the woods, but he never came. The next day was the same, and the day after that. Weeks turned into months, and we never saw Bernard again. We assumed he had moved away as mysteriously as he had arrived. Life went on. The years passed, and our childhood adventures became distant memories. I joined the police force, driven by a desire to protect and serve. It was a job that required me to face the darkest aspects of humanity, but it also gave me a sense of purpose. One rainy afternoon, while cleaning out my attic, I stumbled upon a box of old photos. Among them was the picture Zachary had taken that summer. I stared at it, a flood of memories washing over me. There we were, Michael, Zachary, Bernard, and me, captured in a moment of innocent joy. A strange feeling settled in my gut. Bernard's face seemed to stare back at me, his eyes more intense than I remembered. I took the photo to work the next day, unable to shake the feeling that something was off. I showed it to a colleague who specialized in cold cases. "Hey, take a look at this," I said, handing him the photo. "Do you recognize this kid?" He examined it closely, his brow furrowing. "Give me a second." He walked over to his desk and began sifting through files. After a few minutes, he pulled out a faded document and compared it to the photo. "This is Bernard," he said, his voice hushed. "Bernard Thompson. He went missing almost 30 years ago. It's one of our oldest cold cases." A chill ran down my spine. How could Bernard have been missing for 30 years when we met him only 15 years ago? It didn't make sense. Driven by a hunch, I decided to investigate further. I returned to the woods where we used to play, the place where we had first met Bernard. The trees had grown thicker, the paths more overgrown, but it was still the same place. I walked deeper into the woods, my mind racing with possibilities. As I reached a small clearing, I noticed something half buried in the underbrush. It was a piece of fabric, tattered and weathered by time. I knelt down, my heart pounding, and began to dig. The earth was damp and heavy, but I kept at it, my hands trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. Then I saw it. A skeletal hand, fingers curled as if reaching for something. I unearthed the rest of the remains, my breath catching in my throat. There, in the shallow grave, lay the skeletal remains of a child, long forgotten and alone. I called for backup, my mind numb with shock. As we waited for the forensic team to arrive, I couldn't shake the feeling that Bernard was still watching me, his piercing blue eyes following my every move. The investigation confirmed what I already knew. The remains belonged to Bernard Thompson, a boy who had gone missing nearly 30 years ago. But the mystery of how he had appeared to us 15 years ago remained unsolved. I often think back to that summer, to the strange quiet boy who appeared out of nowhere and then vanished just as suddenly. Bernard's ghost, or whatever he had been, left an indelible mark on our lives. Michael and Zachary, when I told them what I had discovered, were as bewildered as I was. We may never know the full truth of what happened, but I can't help but feel that Bernard was trying to tell us something. Perhaps his restless spirit sought companionship, a way to reach out and be remembered. Or maybe there are things in this world that we simply cannot understand, forces beyond our comprehension that shape our destinies. Whatever the case, I know one thing for certain. Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, lingering in the shadows of our past, forever haunting our memories. This is story number 5. My Blood is Special.
I was in an accident 17 years ago. I was 20 then. I needed a blood transfusion, so they tested my blood and got me the type I needed. I'm grateful for it, really. But what happened after changed my life in ways I could never have predicted. I got a call from someone claiming to be from one of the largest medical research lab in the world. I've since signed an NDA, plus a bunch of other hush-hush forms, so I can't mention their name. That call was quickly followed by a visit to my home, by officials, medical and official-looking personnel in suits. They had detected a rare strain of antibodies in my blood. That's what they told me anyway. Antibodies that could cure a previously untreatable disease. I can't say too much of what it is, for I've signed papers. And very honestly, I didn't understand half of what they said, but it sounded important. Like my blood saves lives. Millions of lives, even. So I agreed to donate my blood for their research. They didn't get back to me for more than 6 months, and I thought that was it. Maybe my blood wasn't as useful as they had thought it was. They turned up at my home 8 months after that first meeting. They had figured out a way to use the antibodies in my blood to cure and prevent said disease. That was when life really changed for me. Initially, I was ecstatic. Having blood that saves lives? That made me feel useful, helpful, powerful even. I committed to donating blood once a month. I ate well, kept fit, to make sure I was fit for donation. I knew the importance of my blood, after all. But then, they found a way for me to give blood every week, without serious repercussions. I just had to keep myself in tip-top condition. They gave me nutritional and lifestyle guidelines. I said yes, though it was a chore, because, well, who can say no to saving lives? And so many lives, at that? Let me tell you this. However meaningful something is, when you've to put aside plans, modify your entire lifestyle for it, and get jabbed with a thick needle every week, it quickly loses its shine. Nobody forced me to do anything. But they outlined the consequences of every action clearly. If I were to smoke, I'd not be able to donate blood for the week. And that would mean an average of 347 lives lost. That's what they said. I don't even know if that disease has that high rates of death and prevalence, but okay. I tried to check said disease and its prevalence rates online, which didn't seem to match up to what they said. But they explained that there were many layers to it, that their lab has a worldwide reach, that you have to consider the entire world's people with said disease, their access to the cure, the stage of their disease, etc., etc. Again, they lost me. I'm not especially smart, so I went along with it. Honestly, being told that moments of carelessness, of impulsivity may cost hundreds of lives, well, that leads to a meticulously planned out life, one full of anxiety and stress. Yet, at the same time, I needed to keep mentally well, to not let my mental health affect my physical health. So I had to do a lot of therapy and mindfulness. They allowed antidepressants, but dissuaded me from them, just in case. If it doesn't sound that bad to you, let me paint you a picture of my last vacation with my ex-husband. It was 12 years ago. We agreed to go to the south of France. Sounds ideal. Romantic, yeah? Nope. While there, I had to watch my diet. That's fine. But that was when I first noticed the people following me. I don't know when it started. I mean, I'm not the most aware person when it comes to my surroundings. I'm often in my head, worrying about my blood health. But I finally noticed that I was being followed. Very subtly, very stealthily. I probably wouldn't have spotted them if not for the fact that I was robbed at knife point. My ex-husband was knocked out first. The robbers looted his stuff as they waved the knife in my face, saying that they were gentlemen, but that I needed to hand over my purse. Trust me, I wasn't about to fight. I was about to hand my purse over when I think I had a panic attack. My vision blurred, my breath came in strangled short gasps, and my chest squeezed painfully. Doubling over, I felt cold sweat oozing out of my pores like my insides were being wept out my skin. My vision had all but gone dark when I heard two thumps. I collapsed to the floor, and from my viewpoint on the ground, with the cobblestones filling half my field of vision, I saw the two robbers on the ground. Out. Cold. 3 vague figures dragged the downed robbers along the path until they were out of sight. Next thing I knew, someone was checking my pulse. I heard the man say something along the lines of me being all right, and that the emergency services were on their way. Then, I was alone. I passed out just as a group of people began to surround me and my ex, cooing in worry. When I woke up, I described what happened to the police, to the medics, but no one had seen those 3 people. The ones who had knocked out the robbers. There was no sign of the robbers either. The police weren't sure what to make of it, but they let me go after getting a thorough report and making sure we were checked in at a hospital. They claimed that I had passed out due to my panic attack, which was odd, since that had never happened before. My ex was fine, and we wanted to go on with our holiday after we had both recuperated in the hospital for a day. We tried to extend our vacation to make up for lost time, But then I remembered. Any delay in blood donation meant the loss of lives. My ex-husband blew up then. He had been more than patient with my strict lifestyle and requirements. He never could get me to go on vacation with him for over 6 days. He understood my issues, and he had signed papers as well. But he just really wanted one trip where we could enjoy ourselves for real. "What's one delay going to do? It's one time in years," he had begged, frustration lacing his tone. I had caved, texted my contact, asked to push back the date of the blood donation. He got back to me saying it was up to me, but that X number of lives hung in the balance. I showed the message to my ex, who hung his head. We didn't extend that trip. In a month, my ex had upped and left. He disappeared from my life, seemed to just have moved out of the country altogether. In the morning, he said he was leaving for work, and by the evening he sent me a text. He had enough. He was leaving. He told me he never wanted to see me again, that if I ever loved him, I would let him go. Not make things harder by searching for him. I never heard from him after that. He didn't bother to pack. His leaving was a huge slap in the face. I never thought him capable of being so cruel. The fact that he never even said goodbye in person made me wonder if our marriage had been such a torture the entire decade. Well, I never dated again, and people kept following me. It didn't help my sanity. I mean, I know they were there to keep me safe, that I ought to feel secure, at ease, knowing people were out there watching out for me. But all I felt was watched, paranoid, targeted. No matter where I went, I didn't feel free to just be. I was always aware of trailing eyes, but it never truly scared me, until a time when they stepped in again to protect me. I was drinking a soda at a bar, since my diet was strictly no alcohol. As I was lifting the glass to my lips, someone rushed forward, smacked my drink out of my hands, and scurried off. Disappeared. I was pissed. The drink got all over my stuff, including my phone, which died, temporarily, thankfully. I requested the CCTV footage to hunt down that man, which the bar obliged. I was close to the bartender. She was endlessly amused by my regular appearance at the bar, despite only ever drinking soda or hot chocolate. I was the butt of a lot of good-natured jokes. As we looked at the footage together, it quickly became clear that the drink slapper had been watching me the entire night. I simply hadn't noticed. My jaw tensed and I felt a rush of heat to my head. Minutes before he had slapped the drink from my hands, the footage showed a man shifting closer to me. He unobtrusively dropped something into my drink. The drink slapper had saved me from being roofied. It sounds great, right? Well, I thought so. Except, the bar and I both thought it was important to report the guy who roofied my drink to the police. It was late then, around 2 a.m. My bedtime's usually at 10, 11 p.m., but once a month I let loose a little. Not in terms of drinking alcohol, but in that I liked to pretend I was a normal person who could hang out with her friends till late at a bar. I was wiped, didn't want to deal with the police and interrogations, blah blah. So we agreed that the next day we would contact the police. We didn't contact the police. Overnight the bar burnt down. I don't know how or why, but I have my suspicions. More than one face was captured in the footage. Mr. Drink Slapper must have not wanted his face known to the authorities. Honestly, after that, I couldn't really trust the personnel from that medical research lab. I don't even know if that's what they are. I've been to a small clinic that they are supposedly affiliated with, but I've never been to the headquarters. I wasn't sure what else I could do, though. Did I want to risk not saving hundreds, thousands of lives just because I wasn't convinced that my blood was being used to do good? They had shown me a ton of data, given me a lot of information, but I didn't truly understand those. I had never met a single person that I've saved. I've been told that I've saved more than 200,000 lives so far. I don't know how much of that is an exaggeration, or if it's even real. Honestly, sometimes I really start to have serious doubts about whether that's really what my blood is being used for. Would a medical research lab put so much effort into ensuring my well-being, just to save lives? Is any organization that powerful, with so many resources at its disposal, be that good-hearted? I know. I'm probably just resentful and making up conspiracies to try to give myself an out from the non-stop blood donations and controlled life I lead. Anyway, where was I? Oh, yes. So last week they asked that I check myself into their facilities to do a full body checkup. They also wanted to run some tests. Non-invasive and pain-free, they assured me. They needed me to be in there for a month. Something snapped then. I don't know if it was the 17 years of strict regimens, the lack of freedom, the inability to take long breaks, or the paranoia of being followed 24/7. Maybe it was their interference even in my choice of career. They insisted on something low stress, that they would provide funding if I needed it. Definitely not vet school, they had said. Something about, would I rather save animal lives than human lives? Whatever it was, something did it. I snapped. I'm done, I had said. I've done enough. And I'm done. The officer speaking to me had seemed shocked. All his flabbers were gasted. He sputtered something about lives to be saved. Lives lost. The weight of all those deaths on me. But I simply shrugged. You have money. You have tech. You can figure out how to replicate my blood, the antibodies within. I've given enough. There's plenty for you to experiment with. We can't do that yet. We need your blood. They need your blood, he said, or something along those lines. I'll die one day anyway. And who would save those lives then? I ain't having kids, can't have them, so what happens after I die? Better you guys start figuring this out now. Go figure. After which, I shut down, refused to say another word no matter how he begged. Until he agreed. All he needed from me, he said, was a visit to their headquarters. Donate blood just one more time. And do a full body screening. Whatever helps them leave me alone. So yes, my freedom began last week. It has been amazing. I went out to a bar just now, had my first drink in almost 2 decades. The trip to the headquarters is in a week, so I've plenty of time to get my body back to tip-top condition before my final blood donation. I know I should be feeling immensely guilty right now. After all, I'm putting my freedom above others. My freedom at the cost of other lives. But all I feel is relief. I guess I'm more selfish than I thought. To the organization's credit, they haven't badgered me at all. There's been a complete lack of contact from the organization after. Part of me is a little unsettled. Would they really just let me go? After they had put so much effort into keeping me safe and well? Another part of me is just glad they are respecting my decision. They haven't stopped following me, though. I can see the shadows from the men's legs blocking the light entering the gap beneath my front door. They've been there for a good 2 hours now. I'm not sure when they'd leave. Maybe they'll just keep watch until I head to their HQ in a week. Then I'd be free. Damn it, work texts. Don't people know to respect the official work hours? It's 1 a.m. It's my boss. What do you mean you're quitting? You can't just disappear. You've to serve your notice. Did something happen? Call me. BTW, it's really surprising you'd pull something like quitting over email. My eyebrows shot up. Quitting? I had done no such thing. I wanted freedom, but not that much freedom. I need my job. I'm gonna check my email. Okay, OMG. There's a sent email. A whole-ass resignation letter. Declaring that I won't be showing up for work with immediate effect. That I had an emergency to attend to in another city. Someone must have hacked my email. The resignation letter even had my e-signature. It was sent out just half an hour ago. Trust my boss to be awake at this time of the night, checking her emails. I'd better call her to clarify. Wait. Shit. Someone just inserted a key in my lock. WTF. Do the guys outside have a key? Okay. I just locked my bedroom door. Holy shit, they're in my house. I don't know what they want. I'm calling the cops. Shit, the call got cut off. I'm not sure how long I'll have the internet banging on door. I'm scared. Help. Edit. Oh. It was a false alarm. Just my family coming to check in on me. I overreacted. The work thing was settled too. Just an angry ex-colleague. All is well. No need to worry.
This is story number 6, Nightmare at the Morgue, the comedian who came back to life.
I quit my job at the funeral home after an embalming went horribly wrong. "Okay, this one's done," John said, stitching up an incision. Somewhere across the room I heard a phone ring. "Fuck, would you get that? I got shit all over my hands." "Yeah, I got you, John," I said, making my way over to the landline on the wall. There was a paramedic on the other end of the line. He told me there was a car crash with 1 fatality and asked if we could take care of the body. "Hey, John, do we have time for one more tonight?" I hollered to my co-worker. "Yeah, just meet him out front," John replied. I had just lit my second cigarette as the ambulance pulled up, lights on but sirens off. I took a hefty drag, then stomped it out, and held the door open for the attendant to wheel the stretcher in. I pulled the sheet off of the body and was met with a "holy shit" from John. "Oh fuck, do you know this guy?" No, he was just a big comedian in the 90s, John said. We began our usual process. I was just an intern, so John did most of the heavy lifting on the cadaver. He said we couldn't afford to botch any part of the process when it came to this high-profile client. John was just finishing up and I was taking my scrubs off when I heard an unfamiliar voice in the room. "Hey, you ever have to pay a parking ticket?" And the voice was cut off by John screaming. I spun around and saw John had fallen onto his ass and the cadaver was sitting upright on the table. "John, I don't know. This guy is dead. We pumped him full of formaldehyde." "And what's the deal with formaldehyde?" the corpse said, slitting one of his wrists open with a nearby scalpel and sprayed a stream of liquid into John's slack-jawed mouth. Thinking fast, I ripped the paper towel dispenser off the wall and threw it at the corpse's head while John was coughing and spitting out the poison onto the floor. I heard a crack and saw the corpse's head bend back at a 90-degree angle. "Ouch! That was my funny bone, pal," it said, cranking its head back into place. "John, we have to get the fuck out of here," I said, trying to pick my co-worker up off the ground, who was still recovering from his unwelcome drink. "Fuck, open the storage room, the closet over there," John said as I dragged us towards it. I wrenched it open and started pulling John in, but the corpse was right behind us. "Hey, in show business they always told me to break a leg," the corpse said as he slammed the door on John's leg until I heard a snap. John screamed as I pulled him in and locked the door behind us. "Oh, tough crowd I see. Well, have you heard the one about the priest, the rabbi, and the grizzly bear?" The corpse continued on from outside. "Jesus Christ, I don't know what's going on." "But was his stand-up this bad?" I asked. "Hey, I never said he was good," John replied, wincing as he grabbed his leg. I looked around the storage room, mop and bucket, extra scrubs, and a fire axe and extinguisher behind glass. Bingo. I took the little mallet attached to the case and I smashed the glass to retrieve our tickets out of here. I gave the fire extinguisher to John and armed myself with the axe. "John, I'm gonna open the door. When I do, be ready to blast the fucker with that, okay? I'll do the rest." John nodded and got ready to pull the pin. I could still hear that fucking thing babbling from outside the door, but as soon as I unlocked it, I could only hear silence. I swung the door open, ready to pounce, but the fucking thing wasn't there. I looked to my right and heard a scream from my left, and before I knew it, the corpse had knocked me onto the ground and was on top of me. "Now, John! Now!" I screamed, trying to push the thing off of me as it tried to bite at my face. I was met with an icy white cloud from the fire extinguisher that obscured my vision and frosted my glasses over. The corpse began to tense up, and I knocked it off of me and began trying to wipe my glasses clean. "Wow, this is colder than my ex. That's not even a joke, just facts," the corpse said. "Rigor mortis, spray the fucker again. I bet it's setting in faster with this," I heard John scream as he chucked the extinguisher towards me. I picked it up off the floor and emptied its contents onto the corpse. It began to say something, but its jaw froze in place. I picked up the fire axe and began hacking at its neck. I cut the corpse into 6 pieces, separating the limbs and head from the body. Me and John decided the best way to deal with this mess was cremation. The family was upset as they had requested an open casket. We managed to talk them out of suing us into oblivion in exchange for the nicest urn money could buy, all on the house. I put in my resignation the following day and moved away shortly after. I heard John retired. Can't say I blame him. I've done research and talked to others in the industry, but I've never come across anything even close to an explanation of what happened that night. What do you all make of this?
This is story number 7. We found an abandoned structure in the middle of the wilderness. I wish we hadn't.
Just outside of the town I live in, there is a massive, densely wooded park that is largely forgotten. It's not that people don't know it is there, but it's simply more of an afterthought. It's not ideal for hiking. It doesn't have any kid-friendly play areas, or even a pond to attempt fishing in. What it essentially amounts to is miles and miles of wooded area. But me and my college buddy Derek had long known about something that lay deep within the park, and we had finally built up the courage and resources to explore it. Derek had always been into this type of thing since I met him a few years before at the start of college. Although we didn't know each other for that long, we quickly became best friends, forming a connection like I'd never had with anyone before. Despite that, he was the type of person who would keep a lot of stuff buried deep. I never blamed him for it, as his usual coping mechanisms tended to be positive, such as going to the gym or writing. But when his sister had passed away a few months prior, I didn't hear from him for a week. One day, he finally returned my calls, and he had only one thing to say. "Henderson Park this summer. We are going to find it." At the beginning of the summer break, we began our hike. After a couple hours of trekking a route which we had planned and charted out for months, we finally made it to the spot. It was a clearing spanning a couple hundred meters in area, and once we made it past the last of the foliage, it didn't take but a second to identify what we had come for. In the middle of this open patch lay a large building, abandoned to time and worn down by nature. But yet it stood, beckoning us to enter. The abandoned structure of Henderson Park had been a legend in this town since I could remember. No one knows how it got there, or what it used to be. It was simply a massive building miles deep into the wilderness, with no documentation or history. I almost didn't believe it was real, but we had found someone previously who had made a detailed map of the park. We decided if the structure was there, we were going to find it. "There it is, Sam. Glad to see we didn't come all this way for nothing," Derek said as we rested for a moment to catch our breath. "You act as if we hadn't done our research," I responded, secretly as relieved as he was. There was always the possibility, after all that, the building had withered away, or that a small mistake in navigation would send us off the path. But, luckily, we had found our destination with relative ease. We took the moment to look up at it while we gathered our bearings and documented it with some pictures. It stood tall with at least 3 floors and had plenty of surface area. It appeared like it had been an old school or hospital of some sort, based on its layout. Its exterior was a dark gray, tainted by the decay and moss creeping around it. Despite the wear and tear, there was a surprising lack of graffiti or any signs of human tampering. "Well, you ready to see what's in there?" I said, breaking the silence. Derek turned to me, a look of worry appearing on his face. "No, I think we should head back." He then flashed me a big grin and began to make his way to the structure. I followed, trying to ignore his stupid joke. We made our way to the entrance doors and noted that they appeared to be missing, the only remaining evidence being some scattered pieces of glass. I noted at this point that besides the obvious weathering over time, this building did not seem old at all. In fact, it was as if a building from the modern day had been left to the whims of nature for a century. Before I could ponder this in too much detail, we continued inward, and quickly the darkness began to consume our vision. Derek turned on his flashlight, illuminating the hallway directly in front of us. It was lined with abandoned lockers and debris, which covered most of the doorways. Most of the paths on this floor appeared to be blocked off, or just seemed a bit unstable due to damaged pillars and missing walls. We explored what little we could safely access, until finally coming upon a set of stairs that could either have taken us up to the second floor, or downwards towards what I assumed was a basement area. We wanted to start somewhere, and work our way through the building seamlessly. That inevitably left us with a decision. Should we go upstairs, or explore the basement first? Finally, Derek spoke up. "Dude, I think we should split up." "You can't be serious. How are we going to explore both at the same time? It's the only way," he insisted. "Derek, I'm kidding, man. Let's start downstairs and we can work our way up," Derek said, descending the stairs before I could respond. The stairs proved to be much deeper than we thought. What I assumed was going to take us one floor down felt more like 100. After walking down the stairs for what felt like 10 minutes, I spoke up. "Hey man, this is kind of ridiculous. How deep does this staircase go?" "I don't know, Sam. It's kind of freaking me out, to be honest." But I nodded in agreement. Derek did seem to be getting genuinely concerned for the first time during this trip, but we were on the same page. We had to keep going at this point. Whether this staircase was bottomless or a descent into hell itself, we were going to see the end of it. Luckily, it turned out to be neither of those things, because a few minutes later we hit the bottom. Well, good news is if one of us gets hurt, the other only needs to drag them up 70 flights of stairs, Derek joked, although the thought only made me uneasy. I nodded in agreement. Derek did seem to be getting genuinely concerned for the first time during this trip, but we were on the same page. We had to keep going at this point. Whether this staircase was bottomless or a descent into hell itself, we were going to see the end of it. Luckily, it turned out to be neither of those things, because a few minutes later, we hit the bottom. Well, good news is if one of us gets hurt, the other only needs to drag them up 70 flights of stairs, Derek joked, although the thought only made me uneasy. The area we found ourselves in would probably be best compared to that of a subway tunnel. Well, without the actual train tracks. What lay before us was simply a long vacant tunnel with concrete walls and flooring, and no end in sight. I was beginning to feel like we were out of our depth here. However, I didn't think to protest as Derek began walking down into the tunnel, at least not until we began to hear something echoing deep within the tunnel. We immediately stopped dead in our tracks. What sounded like a high-pitched synth had begun ringing through the tunnel. The echoing was making me feel queasy as it reverberated through my body. It paused for a movement before resuming, every few seconds another tone ringing out like a beacon, progressively getting louder and presumably closer. The sound started to become ear-piercing, and before I knew it, I was on my knees holding my ears, barely withstanding the sharp ringing throughout my head. Just as I thought I was going to black out from the sheer intensity of it, the sound stopped in an instant. I looked over to Derek, who was also recovering from the auditory assault. We both shared a glance and a nod. Our curiosity had seemingly run its course, and we started to quickly head back from the way we came. I was unsure of how to rationalize what just happened, but all I knew is that I would prefer not to experience whatever that was any closer. That's when we heard something else from within the tunnel. The unmistakable sound of footsteps. Our speed walk quickly escalated into a jog, and then a run. Maybe it was just my imagination running wild, but I had some serious doubts that many other people were exploring this place, and especially wandering through this forsaken tunnel. And so we ran, and ran. We hadn't been walking down the tunnel for more than a minute. There was no way we were that far away from the stairs. Yet again, it felt like we were in an endless loop with no end in sight. But then we found it. We stopped and looked at the staircase as we caught our breath. "So," Derek began, trying to form his thoughts. I walked up to the foot of the stairs and put my hands on the large chunks of rubble that now blocked our only exit off. I didn't even have the energy to freak out or to scream. I slumped down, staring at the rubble as if my gaze alone could alter the grim reality we were faced with. That sound, it had to have caused something to collapse, Derek said, trying to rationalize the situation as if that would make things any better. "Derek, we are going to die down here," I said weakly. Before he could respond, we remembered why we were running. The footsteps were now within 20 feet of us, and we had nowhere to run. We both turned our gaze to the direction they were coming from. Whatever it was seemed to be hidden in the shadows, and neither of us wanted to see what was approaching. I could just barely make the outline of a shambling figure, moving erratically and twitching violently with each step. We nodded to each other, seemingly on the same page that if we die here, we are gonna at least put up a fight. But after taking a deep breath, Derek lifted his flashlight and pointed it towards the figure. Derek was lost for words, as was I. There stood Emily, Derek's sister. She appeared to be bruised and beaten, covered in scratches and wearing tattered clothing. But Emily had died earlier that year. This didn't make any sense why she would be alive, let alone here. "Emily, I thought you were..." Derek struggled to find words, as his tears began to well up. Emily weakly smiled, clearly having been through hell. But something was wrong. She had stopped moving. She looked like she could barely stand. Her head was lowered as if she couldn't lift it. I tried to look into her eyes. "Derek," she said weakly. Derek began to walk towards her, his arms open wide, ready to embrace her. It all played out in slow motion as he neared her. I didn't have time to warn him. I didn't have time to tell him to stop, as I noticed the hollow blackness of what should be her eyes. The hellish grin that she could hardly contain. She grabbed him and met his gaze. I can't get the image out of my head, of the look of terror on my best friend's face as he looked into the abyss that were that creature's eyes. And then she unhinged her jaw beyond the point of reason, latching onto Derek as he began to scream. But he didn't have the chance to make a sound as the creature closed its jaws over his head. I ran. Without thinking, I left my friend to his fate, knowing full well he was already dead. I ran. And I kept running. I don't know what I was thinking, or where I was running to. The synth began to reverberate throughout the tunnel, and the ear-splitting ringing began to return, escalating until my body was numb and I couldn't sense where I was. I suddenly snapped back into consciousness, my head still ringing. I lay at the entrance of the structure. It was still bright outside. I sat up, trying to regain my senses. I had no idea what happened. I don't know if I blacked out and somehow found an exit, but that didn't seem likely. I still had my bag with me, with water and food. I could make it back by night if I started hiking, and that's what I did. I reported Derek missing and explained that we got split up on the hike. It's not an uncommon thing for people to go missing on long treks through parks of this size, so it seemed reasonable. I haven't mentioned the structure to anyone until now, but I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since. What if Derek somehow survived? I feel like he is calling to me. I feel like I need to help him. I know I shouldn't, but something is telling me to go back to the structure.